Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I want to thank you all for joining us. Today, my Ontario NDP colleagues and I will be debating our Bill 173, the Intimate Partner Violence Epidemic Act. And our ask could not be any simpler of this government. The ask is that the Government of Ontario shall recognize that intimate partner violence is an epidemic in Ontario. That's it. Full stop. That's our ask. It's a simple, reasonable ask that has been put forward countless times by groups across this province. It was a key recommendation, the first recommendation of the Renfrew County inquest, and a call to action after 3 women were killed by their former partner in 2015. For some unconscionable reason, Doug Ford and his Conservative government has refused to declare this epidemic and to take action. And unfortunately, this epidemic continues to claim lives. We're here today as part of the fight to stop the epidemic of intimate partner violence in Ontario. It's something that impacts far too many people and happens far too often across Ontario. From my hometown of Windsor to Toronto to Sault Ste. Marie. Just last year in Windsor, Zahra Boulay, a vibrant and valued member of our community, was murdered. Her former partner currently stands trial for her murder. Her mother has joined us today as part of her quest for justice, and we'll be hearing from her shortly. I want to thank all of the survivors, families, and advocates from across the province that are joining us for debate today, whether that's here in person or watching online. For everybody that has signed a petition, shared your stories with us, thank you. Your strength and determination to see the long overdue declaration happened and an end to intimate partner violence and gender-based violence is both admirable and inspiring. As legislators, we need to use every tool we have available to make a difference. And this bill is one we have right at our fingertips. The government needs to pass Bill 173, the Intimate Partner Violence Act, today. And with that, I will hand the mic over to my colleague and co-sponsor of the bill, Kristyn Wong-Tam.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, Lisa Gretzky, and thank you to everyone who's joined us in the media studio today. I also want to extend my thank you to Peggy Statler, who is here, another co-sponsor of the bill, as well as MPP Joe Andrew. And also in the room with us is Monique Taylor. This bill is a very simple and elegant request. It actually addresses a number of challenges that we're seeing in Ontario. But let me bring you back to how we got here. On a September morning in 2015, Ontario lost 3 women to preventable gender-based violence when they were murdered in Renfrew County. Anastasia Cusick, Natalie Warmerdon, and Carol Cullington were victims of intimate partner violence, all killed by the same man. The perpetrator had a history of abusive behavior towards these women and demonstrated a pattern of violent behavior that spanned over 40 years, making his crime entirely preventable, predictable, and it represented a tragedy amongst authorities where they have failed. In June of 2022, after a very lengthy and emotional process, the hearings from witnesses ranging from academic experts to law enforcement, a jury in Renfrew inquest issued 86 recommendations to save lives by preventing systemic causes behind gender and intimate partner violence. These recommendations were directed to a number of public bodies, including the federal government, the Privacy Commissioner of Ontario, and the province's chief firearms officer. The vast majority of the recommendations, over 80%, fall directly under provincial purview, and they were to be acted on by the province. The very first of the recommendation, as noted, is to declare intimate partner violence in Ontario an epidemic. Therefore, underlining the urgency of the matter for all of us to see, and also placing that urgency at the feet of the provincial government so that they can then act upon it as the crisis unfolds. 94 municipalities across Ontario have now declared intimate partner violence an epidemic, and that number is going to grow. Cities have taken leadership where the province has failed. And as far as I can see, and the advocates who are here will confirm this, is that this is not a movement that is going to be slowed down. Simply, the crisis is too large. And even during the COVID pandemic, UN health experts called gender-based violence and intimate partner violence the shadow pandemic. We have solutions. Many of them were laid out in the Renfrew inquest. We want to see this government take action. They need to do it as soon as possible and honor the lives of the women lost. And they need to do this as soon as possible to prevent another life loss. I'd like to welcome to the podium two remarkable advocates and speakers. And I want to press upon everyone that telling stories, their personal deep stories about intimate partner violence is not easy. And especially for Faduma Kuso, who traveled from Windsor, who should be celebrating with her daughter and her family on this day of Eid. Instead, she's here with us to describe to you a very painful experience that will haunt her for the rest of her life. Following Faduma's comments, we're going to hear from Erin Lee, the Executive Director of Lanark County Intervale House and Community Support.
Thank you very much. Today, I stand before you with a heavy heart of grief and soul burdened by the pain of loss. Not only the loss, the final loss, but the loss that dragged on for 18 long years. My name is Faduma Kuso, and my daughter, Zahra Adam Bole, the eldest of my 5 children, went missing on Friday, May 26th. 12 days later, her husband of 18 years had been arrested and charged for first degree of her murder. But I'm not here today to talk about those last 10 days. I'm not here to talk about the when, the where, the what, how, and who of what happened the 10 days that ended her life. But I want to talk about the road that led us to those 10 days, the painful experience of 18 long years. And I want to look at the idea of Ontario government saying we cannot declare it epidemic because it's not infectious. It's not a communicable disease. I want to share with you with a personal experience and personal examples how that is. Intimate partner violence is pervasive, preventable, and predictable. Zahra Bula left behind 52 family members, from 90-year-old grandmother to a 3-year-old nephew. And with every blow she had suffered, every black eye she came home with, every attempt of her trying to rescue herself or allowing us to rescue her impacted us and invaded pervasively in every cell of our being. Her seat at the table is to this day left empty. Her plate sitting there where she should have been. Her bedroom is how she had left it. So it's not, if you say it's not a communicable disease, how come it affected friends, family members, community, which she was more than happy to be part of? Zahra was avid blood donor and wanted to donate her organs. I remember when she was 16, first time she got her driver's license, she turned to me and she said, "You have to promise me you'll donate my organs." And I said, "You'll have to promise me you'll donate my organs because you are not going before me." So that shows we're all in a painful experience, nothing that we could grow or leave behind. This is our new normal, and that's how pervasive it is. Even the 3-year-old nephew, last night when we were breaking our fast, asked, "When is she coming? Where is she? She is still at work." And the other thing is, it's so predictable. And like any other communicable disease that we see and we predict it and we decide how to prevent it, is I could see where this is headed. On May the 5th, Zahra came home for the one last time with a black eye. And I told her, I can't watch this anymore. You need to get out. We need to go see the police. And she had called her abuser and decided she was going to leave. As she was walking out of my house, I said, please don't go. Next time, I might end up collecting you in a body bag. Was that a prophecy? No. I wasn't getting any prophetic understanding of what was happening. But as it was predictable to all the family members, we could all see the train my daughter was on only headed to a one stop called the tragedy. And 3 weeks later, I ended up collecting her in a body bag. And the next one is it's preventable. If I can give you a metaphor of a train that my daughter was on, that train had so many stops that where she could be rescued at any time. And she wasn't. And the last stop was tragedy. So the government to say it's not communicable disease, they need to look at this is not something that only affects the one person who is in that relationship. It affects everybody economically, socially, and politically, because that would have been a contributing member of our society. This is not a private matter that we would sweep under the carpet and in a whisper tones that's attached to shame. If we do not name it, if we do not point at it and say, this is what it is, we could never treat it. Nothing could be treated. If you go to the doctor today and the doctor doesn't tell you, you have pneumonia and you should take these antibiotics, how would you know what to do? So I think this is not the final step, but I could not really come up with a reason why the government would not say this is an epidemic. If you want to see it, look at my family. Look at all the other 3 women that were killed within that year when my daughter was killed. And one woman, one person being lost for no reason is too many. And I urge Ontario government to recognize intimate partner violence as epidemic that truly is. By declaring such, we communicate this issue demands our utmost attention and resources and the commitment to change. Declaring intimate partner violence as epidemic is not merely a symbolic act. It's a critical step toward mobilizing comprehensive and coordinated effort to address its root cause, support survivors, and hold perpetrators accountable. So I urge Ontario government today to vote Bill 173 yes. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm honored to be here from a rural community to support and commend the leadership of our 4 NDP members who put forward Bill 173. I may be here from a rural neighboring county to Renfrew County, but I wear several hats, and my lens is quite expansive. As a rural executive director, a provincial advocate, and a member of the Ontario Domestic Violence Death Review Committee. As a member of the inquest team and an advocate, I provided testimony at the Renfrew inquest. This inquest was rooted in rural community, and the recommendations have resonated with so many communities, and the communities are forming this movement. Well, I am proud to stand here knowing that my small rural county was the first to declare IPV an epidemic in the province of Ontario. I see the work and the leadership of Indigenous communities since their declaration in 2005. AMO, Roma, the Association of Chiefs of Police, and national groups, including the Canadian Federation of University Women, labor groups, as well, that are all making it known that intimate partner violence is an epidemic. With close to 100 municipalities having declared IPV an epidemic, I strongly urge all members to vote in support of Bill 173. I agree that it's not symbolic. It's critical for victims, family members, survivors, and those who are living isolated to hear a loud and clear message that they are heard, they are believed, and they're being responded to by the government of Ontario. We have only to read our local papers, listen to media, be online to know that femicide continues to happen across our province. There is no immunity to violence in relationships for any group, any community, culture, faith, or gender. There's no community across this province that has not been impacted by femicide. How many more lives must be taken before the province of Ontario recognizes the epidemic proportion of this violence? This bill is a step to addressing the lived realities of intimate partner violence. In Lanark County, we have a campaign, and that campaign is called See It, Name It, Change It. The government of Ontario must see the level of violence happening. We must name it in order to change it. Let us learn from the experiences of Carol Culleton, Anastasia Kuzak, and Natalie Warmerdam. Support Bill 173. Thank you.
Thank you, Aaron and Fartumo, for joining us and speaking today. I just want to say that while the goal is to have the government support Bill 173, the Intimate Partner Violence Act, and declare intimate partner violence an epidemic in Ontario, that's just the first step. We don't want to see the government support the bill, send it to a committee, and then the government controls the committees and what gets called. So this isn't about them doing something symbolic in the legislature by saying that they passed the bill and then sending it to committee and never calling it, never implementing the law. Or the declaration. So that's an important piece of this as well, is that it's not good enough that the government votes for it. It's we'll appreciate it if they do, certainly, but they cannot play games with this. There are too many women around this province. People like Fartumo, we have Kate in the gallery with us today, and so many others coming from all over the province. This is not a game for them. The government needs to not only support Bill 173, but they need to make sure that it makes it through the process at committee and actually becomes a legal declaration here in Ontario, and then move forward with the steps needed in order to actually address intimate partner violence, including properly funding service providers. And so if there's any questions, we can take questions now.
Thank you. My first question actually probably relates to what you just mentioned, but as is being talked about, I mean, several cities have taken this step, and it's been noted that, provincial declaration wouldn't just be symbolic. So I'm wondering if you can speak to that a little bit more in terms of how you think, a provincial declaration would help. What would it potentially allow the province to do that maybe wouldn't happen without that declaration?
Well, the first step is that the government would actually acknowledge intimate partner violence is an epidemic. It would validate the findings of the Renfrew County inquest where 3 women were killed by their former partner. It would validate the stories of people like Fartumo and her daughter Zahara. It would validate stories like Kate that's here with us today and so many others by saying, just based on semantics, that they reject the recommendation of the inquest is sending a message to every survivor, every victim's family, that the government doesn't see them, doesn't hear them, doesn't believe them, and isn't really going to take action to address the issue that is IPV or gender-based violence. So it's a very important first step for the government to actually call it what it is, and to say to all those people that we see you, and to shed light on it. People live in shame and fear when they are victims of intimate partner violence or gender-based violence. This is the government saying, we see you, we acknowledge you, and we want to help. But it also helps to mobilize people around the province to have discussions with the province, to take the steps needed to make sure that the service providers, so women that are fleeing violence and taking their children with them, actually have a place to stay when they leave. Our shelter in Windsor, I believe it was 25 women had to turn away last year because they didn't have space. They're asking for funding for transitional housing for women and children fleeing intimate partner violence. And the province is telling them to fundraise, to go to community and fundraise. So taking a step like this is what we need in order to continue to build the movement, to push the government in the right direction in order to make sure that they are properly funding the supports and services that the survivors need. And I don't know if somebody else would like to, Aaron?
I think it's a really great question. I think that if we look at the 86 recommendations, there's a roadmap. And I think recommendations 1 to 5 provide the government with a very efficient roadmap. I think historically we know that there was a VAW roundtable that existed that would give and inform and support the government around issues related to intimate partner violence or violence against women. And I think reinstating or creating a roundtable of sorts, I think looking at an implementation committee, I think working with community and coming together like we are doing in this room right now, coming together and looking at the recommendations and implementing recommendations that will actually forge the difference in the change and the validation that's needed as it relates to actually actualizing things so that the things in the province are actually different. So I hope that helps.
I guess maybe for Aaron as well, like it was mentioned about, transitional housing being one area where more is needed. Are there other areas where you think more resources are needed at this point or could be helpful?
I think that that's certainly the equation that's often used to make decisions related to funding for anti-violence agencies and anti-violence network agencies like sexual assault centers. I think that the funding equation needs to be revisited. I think there needs to be an equity lens that actually looks at the kind of funding and how it's decided and allocated. I think that there's a need to have discussions about how we see functions, how we engage with perpetrators, what the value is of the work that we do with perpetrators. I think building collaboration and coordination in community requires funding, and I think that we need to look at recommendations related to how we coordinate our services in our community. When we look at Renfrew County, we know that there was information available, but one system wasn't talking to the other system. And so I think we need to look at the recommendations around coordination, collaboration, perpetrator engagement, and public education. Public education and prevention is huge. However, as an executive director in a rural community, I can tell you that our agency has existed for 45 years, and we don't have any core funding related to public education. We fundraise public education so that we can be in community, talking about and educating others so that we can empower people to be able to not be silent and to take the chance and the risk to have a conversation with us. There are so many people living isolated that don't feel validated and don't feel like they have the channels to reach out and to be heard.
And I guess just, finally, I was wondering, like the government hasn't taken this step up until this point. You have a lot of support here at Queen's Park today. How confident are you that you are going to get the government support, not only for second reading today, but also to get the bill over the finish line?
That's a critically important question, and what we've heard the government say as of last summer and has been repeating it so far is that they're rejecting the declaration. I think that sort of spits in the face of anyone who's actually been part of the coroner's inquest, which I think is very long and arduous process, emotionally draining, but also very costly. The government has been sitting with those recommendations from the Renfrew inquest now since June of 2022, and they have taken very little to no action. So by even rejecting the claim of intimate partner violence as an epidemic, as a declaration, what they're saying to us is that the issue is not a priority for this government. They are saying that they are refusing to look at all legislative, policy, budgetary measures that this government will act on without the lens of intimate partner violence. So we're going to see inaction if this government doesn't declare it by not naming the emergency that it is. And that is probably maybe their end goal, is that if they don't name it as emergency, they don't have to treat it. And so they can go ahead and continue to underfund and defund services. They can continue to not do anything around public awareness and public education. They can leave law enforcement as is with no changes. They don't have to address the challenges, the systemic barriers that we're facing in the criminal justice system. They don't have to talk to the medical community about this. They can continue to do absolutely nothing by saying nothing. But I think we can all agree that the women who have been killed by their intimate partners and their families and their communities and now their municipalities and cities are not taking this silently anymore. Even if the government refuses to declare intimate partner violence, the voice and the movement will continue, and that's become very evidently clear. We'll have 200 advocates traveling from across Ontario filling the chamber this evening for this private members debate. And if this government is not going to hear them today, they will not be going away anytime soon. They're coming back, as far as I can tell. They're coming back.
If I can just add to that, intimate partner violence can impact everybody, anybody, regardless of gender, but it disproportionately impacts women. And the goal of an abuser, someone who is abusing a woman, is to silence them and to control them and to keep them away from the public eye, out of community, away from family, and out of the public eye. In Windsor last year, there were nearly 2,400 calls to the police for intimate partner violence. The vast majority of calls when it came to violence, almost half of the calls for assaults were a case of intimate partner violence. And we're starting to see municipalities and police forces and others that are acknowledging that it exists and that it is an epidemic. And if the government thinks for a minute that the women in our caucus, the women standing here with me today, the women that are coming to watch debate and participate debate, those watching at home, the service providers around the province, most of them are women that are providing those services. If the government thinks that we are going to stay silent, that we are just going to go away because they won't declare this or because they dismiss it, they're very, very wrong. They are very, very wrong. And they are just as bad as the perpetrators, in my opinion.
The tragedy today, what's even more tragic than the woman we lost is we're still 2024, April of 2024, is still asking for this to be named. That's where we are. It's not anything, just to start naming it. That's what we are still asking for, 2024. Just think about how tragic that is. And anybody who's here or watching online, just think about as you sit to the dinner table with your families to know how tragic that is. We are 2024 asking our government to declare intimate partner violence as epidemic. That's the greatest tragedy of it all.
Are there any other questions? Seeing none, thank you very much for attending the press conference today. We'll see you in the chamber for the debate. Okay, thanks, everyone.